Millions along the United States East Coast trust that tsunamis are a distant Pacific threat, yet history proves otherwise. In 1755, a Lisbon quake sent lethal waves across the Atlantic, followed by a Newfoundland tragedy in 1929. Today, New Jersey's own audits reveal missing evacuation routes. 6-foot waves struck more than 30 stations in 2023. If the volcano in the Canary Islands collapses, models predict a tsunami 500 kilometers wide, smashing landmarks from Atlantic City to the Statue of Liberty within hours. Why have Americans ignored the warnings, and could preparation truly make the difference? On the beaches of New Jersey, families stroll the boardwalk as if the Atlantic is a gentle neighbor. Most people here think of tsunamis as disasters that happen somewhere else, in Japan, Hawaii, or California. But official audits of New Jersey's coastal towns reveal a different story. Dozens of jurisdictions lack designated tsunami evacuation routes. In Atlantic City, there are no signs pointing inland, no drills, and few residents who would even recognize the warning siren. A 2022 state review found that nearly a third of posted evacuation signs are missing or badly faded, and many communities have no plan for how to move people to safety if a wave were ever to come. This sense of security is not limited to New Jersey. Polls show that most East Coast residents believe tsunamis are a Pacific problem, not an Atlantic one. Emergency managers admit that the word tsunami rarely appears in local disaster plans. Unlike the West Coast, where schools practice evacuations and cities invest in vertical shelters, the Atlantic seaboard has almost no culture of tsunami readiness. In New Jersey, some emergency officials privately worry that a real warning would trigger confusion rather than orderly action. The gap between perception and reality is wide. While the Pacific has learned its lessons through tragedy, the East Coast remains exposed. The question is not just whether the ocean can deliver a devastating wave, but whether anyone here would know what to do if it did. The evidence from recent audits and public awareness surveys points to a coastline living on borrowed time, its vulnerability hidden in plain sight. Long before modern warning systems, the Atlantic Ocean proved its power with two disasters that left entire societies reeling. On November 1st, 1755, Lisbon was rocked by one of the largest earthquakes ever recorded in Europe, estimated at magnitude 8.5 to 8.9. The ground shook for minutes, toppling buildings and igniting fires, but the true horror came from the sea. Less than an hour after the quake, a wall of water surged up the Tagus River, swallowing the city's harbor and flooding the lower districts. Contemporary accounts describe waves reaching up to 12 meters in the city, and 15 meters along the nearby coast. The death toll in Lisbon and surrounding areas soared to around 40,000, much of it from the tsunami. The same wave crossed the Atlantic, with ships in the Caribbean reporting sudden surges and run-up heights of 2 to 3 meters observed along the New England coast. In colonial America, the event introduced the unsettling idea that distant disasters could reach their shores. Nearly 2 centuries later, on November 18, 1929, the Grand Banks earthquake struck off Newfoundland. This time, the shaking triggered a massive underwater landslide, displacing hundreds of millions of tons of sediment. The resulting tsunami slammed into the Burin Peninsula with waves over 13 meters high, destroying dozens of fishing villages and killing 28 people in minutes. Survivors described entire communities swept away before anyone could react. Tide gauges as far south as Cape Cod recorded sea level anomalies, a stark reminder that the Atlantic's hidden slopes can unleash deadly waves with little warning. These historic events reveal that the Atlantic is not a passive neighbor. It is capable of violence on a scale that reshapes coastlines and lives. In April 2012, a swarm of small earthquakes, 15 in just 10 days, shook the Atlantic seabed east of Boston. The strongest reached magnitude 4, but what unsettling researchers found was their location, right on the edge of thick, unstable sediments. USGS records show over a dozen submarine landslides along the New England and Mid-Atlantic shelf, some triggered by earthquakes as minor as 3.5. Laboratory tests confirm that even faint tremors can send these saturated clays sliding into deeper water, stripping away the shelf's stability. The scars left behind mark places where the ocean floor has already failed, each one a silent threat. In June 2023, the danger surfaced in a new form. NOAA tide gauges captured a 6-foot surge at more than 30 sites from North Carolina to Maine. Not from an earthquake, but a meteotsunami. In Newport, Rhode Island, water overtopped seawalls and flooded streets, injuring dozens. NOAA scientists point out that these sudden pulses can arrive with no warning at all. The Atlantic shelf is unstable, its sensors recording real, recent anomalies. The risks are no longer real. Cumbre Vieja rises quietly on La Palma, its fractured western flank mostly overlooked outside volcanology circles. For over 20 years, researchers have modeled a scenario that sounds improbable but is rooted in physical evidence: a massive collapse, sending up to 500 cubic kilometers of rock into the Atlantic. The numbers are stark. A sudden slide of this scale would create a water dome nearly 900 meters high, launching a wave front hundreds of kilometers wide. Simulations suggest the initial wave could reach 600 meters, racing across the ocean at 720 kilometers per hour. The U.S. East Coast from Miami to Boston would have 10 to 12 hours before impact. By landfall, the wave's height would shrink, but even a 2 or 3 meter surge could inundate neighborhoods, flood subway systems, and threaten landmarks. Some volcanologists argue the risk is overstated, pointing to evidence of slower, staged collapses and a more stable volcano than early models assumed. Yet the threat remains, grounded in computer models, paleoslide records, and the uneasy silence of a volcano few are watching. 12 million people live within 5 kilometers of the Atlantic shoreline from New Jersey to New England. The exposure is not abstract. Inundation models show the Statue of Liberty's pedestal, just 3 meters above sea level, lies squarely within the projected flood zone of a major Atlantic tsunami. Plymouth Rock, a symbol of American beginnings, sits at the water's edge in Massachusetts, its base scarcely 4 meters above the tides. Boston's Old North Church, famous for its midnight lanterns, stands just over 1 kilometer from the harbor, at an elevation that puts its historic foundation at risk if a wave overtops the city's seawalls. The Atlantic City Boardwalk, a landmark known for summer crowds and neon lights, is built on pilings barely 2 meters above the sand. In a modeled Cumbre Vieja collapse, waves of 2 to 3 meters could sweep across these icons, flooding subway tunnels, power substations, and hospitals that serve entire regions. Hundreds of thousands of homes, many in low-lying, densely packed neighborhoods, would be exposed with little time to react. For coastal communities, the threat is not just to property or statistics, but to the places and people that define the Atlantic shore. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's National Tsunami Warning Center relies on a patchwork of sensors to monitor the Atlantic, but the coverage is thin. Early tide gauges, first installed in the 1920s, were designed for navigation, not for detecting fast-moving waves. The DART system, which stands for Deep Ocean Assessment and Reporting of Tsunamis, revolutionized warning times in the Pacific. Its network is dense enough to catch even modest waves minutes after they form. In the Atlantic, only about a quarter of that network exists. Most DART buoys are stationed far offshore, leaving large stretches of the East Coast shelf unmonitored. When Japan's 2011 tsunami struck, alerts went out in 6 minutes. On the United States East Coast, the warning window can stretch to 15 minutes or more, with gaps in sensor coverage that could leave entire cities blind to an approaching wave. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration engineers point to latency data and sensor maps that show a stark difference: the Pacific a grid, the Atlantic a scatter of dots. The technology exists, but the commitment to deploy it here has lagged behind the risk. Every lesson from history points to a simple fact. The difference between catastrophe and survival is not geography or luck, but what people do before the wave arrives. The Atlantic has already sent warnings through Lisbon's ruined streets, Newfoundland's vanished villages, the silent signals of unstable seabeds, and the unexpected pulse of a meteotsunami. that caught the East Coast off guard. The science is clear. The technology exists, but none of it matters if communities wait until after disaster strikes to act. Preparedness is not a luxury for other places or distant shores. It is the only line between normal life and irreversible loss. The decision to treat the Atlantic as a threat, not a backdrop, is the one choice that can save lives before the ocean forces its lesson. The East Coast's greatest risk isn't just the next wave, it's denial. History proves disaster strikes long before readiness. Every major city from Boston to Miami still lacks basic tsunami plans. The pattern is clear. Preparation only comes after tragedy. Let's break that cycle. Subscribe to stay informed.